David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate your time today. Really excited to be having this conversation with you. So, I mean, you've had quite a journey from being a PE teacher at my old secondary school, so we
Yeah.
know each other, to primary school head teacher as well, huge transition, and now partner in a mental health and first aider training provider. Can you share a little bit about your story, what led to your transition?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, coming out of university and my background is sports science and came out of university into a PE teaching, which I loved, and really found a real passion for that subject. And then just by chance didn't have a full time job at the time, but I did some supply teaching in a primary school, St Mary's in Hornchurch, which I didn't think I'd be interested in it at all. I thought much my niche was going to be sort of the sort of older students, and did a few days in a primary school and absolutely loved it. And having your own form class and having that group of children from September to July where you could really make a difference, and you got to know them, they got to know you, and that rapport, that sort of understanding of where they've come in that morning. You could tell if they've had a good morning or etc. So yeah, really enjoyed that, and then went got full time in secondary, and then eventually went into primary teaching full time, and then progressed in primary to both in maintained sector and independent schools. So I was a deputy head in independent school for 5 years, and then a headship in back at St Mary's where it all started,
Mm.
for nearly 5 years. So yeah, it was a sort of over 20-year career in education, which I absolutely loved. And it was a joy to be able to do those sorts of things. And yeah, it was a sad day when that came to an end, but it had to, and primarily because of my own well-being. I got to the point where I burnt myself out in the role, and it wasn't an overnight thing. It was a gradual descent into sort of poor mental health myself, and ended up being diagnosed with a multitude of different conditions, so from depression, anxiety, PTSD relating to some safeguarding things that I dealt with at the time, which left me in a really bad place, psychologically and physically. And so it came to the point whereby there were suicidal thoughts and ideals that were coming into my head and things like that about an impending return to work and things. And it was sort of, I think the thing people don't really understand with education, for a lot of people, it's kind of a relationship in terms of the vocational aspect of it, and the fact that we go into education because we care. Walking away from something you really care about is almost like an end of a relationship. And my school, where I was a head teacher, really mattered to me. It was sort of got into my, into my blood, as it were. And it was like walking away from a long-term sort of relationship with the school, and where I started my journey with primary education, to being sort of, custodian of the school for whatever time I was head, was a real honour and privilege. But it was sort of came to the point whereby it wasn't good for me in terms of my
Mm.
well-being. And so I had to make that decision. Fortunately, it was one of those decisions I couldn't make by myself. I didn't have, I suppose, the courage to sort of end it, um, because I felt like I was sort of letting the school down or letting the staff down and things like that. And it was very difficult in that regard. And it was actually sort of getting to the point whereby my family had to say to me, "Look, you need to let go of this." I had a deep and meaningful conversation with my dad and my wife, and just sort of it's got to the point where, do you know what, this isn't, you can't do this. So it's led you to this point with your own well-being. So it's time to let go. And which was a very difficult thing, but actually really good, because someone else made that decision for me almost. It was kind of like you need to do this,
Mm.
which I did. And then the family business was there in the background. So my dad started Crusaider First Aid when he retired from the police, as a first aid training provider. And the plan was always I was going to take it over at some point because it mattered to him, and I didn't want to let that sort of business sort of end when he decided to retire. So it just came about at the right time. We turned it around into the first aid training. But also when I came on board, once I'd recovered and I was in a much better place psychologically myself, I decided that I'd like to do mental health training to hopefully stop people falling into the pitfalls that I fell into, because my
Mm.
situation was entirely preventable if I'd looked after myself throughout the journey. So that's kind of where I came from in terms of my motivation for bringing mental health training on board with Crusaider. So we became Crusaider First Aid Mental Health and Wellbeing. Um, and so, so that's where we came from. And now we also do education consultancy as well. So I work with trainee teachers, mentoring them through their pathway towards early career teaching. So I'm used to utilising some of my experience from that. But yeah, so my goal now is about being well myself and making sure that I have capacity to do the things, to be the best dad that I can be, to be the best husband that I can be, and then thirdly, the best professional that I can be. And it's important that that I do that, and what I do makes a difference, hopefully. So we work with schools and organisations, looking at strategies around their well-being from a strategic perspective, but also from a day-to-day running perspective. So what can we do as an organisation that meaningfully changes the well-being of our employees? So looking after our employees to make sure we can deliver whatever field we're in, we can deliver the best service to our clients, whether they be teachers and their clients being their pupils, or whether it be big organisations who provide services or whatever the role is that they provide. So it's been really good. I've been doing it now for over 5 years, so which has flown by. Thoroughly enjoying it, and it's given me a whole new perspective on life. And I went into education, and in my time in education, I never thought I'd be doing anything else other than what I was doing. And just to really reassure you, you obviously teach yourself, Andrew, and you know how demanding it is, but that it's an entirely preventable journey that I've been on, in terms of, if you take care of little things in your own well-being, it will give you sustenance to be able to maintain the career, and it can be a career for life, 100%. And I firmly believe that, and that's what I advocate. When I'm working with teachers or schools, it's about, no, actually, let's make this as easy as possible in a very demanding role. But it's a demanding role, but it's exceptionally important, and more so than ever. I think, in terms of societal roles and societal pressures. Yeah.
It's the weight of, responsibility that teachers have is just is incredibly large. And
Yeah.
I just think, especially as a head, the things that you have to do, the day-to-day operations, the decisions that you have to make, the responsibility, and you even talked about, the safeguarding aspects of that. It's so many, you have to wear so many hats within this
Mm-hmm.
role that it's hard to even imagine how you do function even with a personal life, and you almost
Mm-hmm.
have to dissociate from all the things that you're doing, and it's like you never switch off. And
Yeah.
it's I think the training of the work that you were doing, I mean, this is how we crossed paths again. You did a training at one of my previous schools that I worked at, and I think it's so important that other people become aware of the signs, and like you say, it's preventable, and we
Mhm.
can spot that in each other and know, can sense when other people are, need a little bit more support, or we need to rethink or
Absolutely.
strategize.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's so important in terms of I always reflect when I talk about schools, and always reflect on the sort of the message behind the geese migrating in formation and flying in a V formation across, thousands of miles on a migration. And it really reflects that in a school or organization. We always think the goose at the front of the V is the head teacher or senior leader. It's not at all. And it's, I was really privileged to work in a school where I had amazing people around me. And it is all about the strength of numbers, in terms of, the head teacher doesn't get a school to a judgment, or it doesn't get a school to a place, as the head teacher provides a vision, and some inspiration and things like that. But it all comes from it's the staff who motivate and reward, and it's about spreading that out. And it's a demanding role wherever you work in a school. It's demanding because you've got live things in front of you who need, who change every day, whose needs alter every day. And you have the social work aspect of it. You have the police officer work of it. You have the the counsellor, you have the teacher, you have, everything else about it. And more falls on the responsibility of schools. And so, yes, it's a high pressure job, but it's about perspective. And I think you hit the nail on the head about knowing how to turn off and being able to leave it behind. Because if you don't, and that was my problem, I didn't leave it behind. So I was thinking about it all the time and burnt myself out through that. So I was, there was an occasion when we were on holiday, and my sort of, I suppose, happy place is always around sort of nature, woodlands, rivers, flowing water. And we were up in Scotland on the Caledonian Canal, going from Inverness up to across Loch Ness and into the Caledonian Canal, which is my idea of heaven, surrounded by nothing but lochs and water and mountains and countryside. And I remember sort of quite a few days into the trip saying to my wife, and I think we were 10 days into a trip, saying to my wife, I don't know what it is, but I just don't feel like I can switch off. I felt tense the whole time, physically tense. And that was actually part of my burnout process, that I was exuding symptoms and signs that I was in a bad place mentally, but I was really good at pretending I was okay. I was really good at masking, that I was sort of, pretending to be an 8 out of 10 rather than actually what I really probably was a 3 or 2 out of 10. But being honest with myself. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's a high octane profession. And I think that's very rarely is that understood from outside of the profession, of how hard people in education work. And it's unbelievable until you step outside. Sometimes you don't realize it yourself, but it's like getting off a treadmill that's been going 100 miles an hour. And until you stand there by the side of the treadmill and see how fast it's been going, you're like, well, how have I done that for so long? So it's about, how can I help people in education step off that treadmill regularly to recover before then getting back on? So it's about, because you can't run at 100 miles an hour for, to sustain it. It's a marathon, not a sprint, a career in education. Yeah.
Yeah. And so in terms of like, what do you think is like the biggest challenges that, in education that you are faced for mental health, like that sort of led towards this sort of, burnout and this sort of crisis that you faced? Is there, there's so many things, but can you think of, what is something that really was a real crisis point?
I think it was my descent into poor mental health was, I always use the analogy of, it was like walking out into the Mediterranean from the beach. You sort of start to just walk out, and every step you take, you go a millimeter deeper. So my descent was very gradual and slow. So it probably took me probably 3 years to get ill, really. But then I had established really bad habits in my early teaching career. And so they became my default settings in terms of taking work home, in terms of, stealing hours, in terms of, if I just do this now, if I step out now, I can go and mark those books, as a young teacher or something like that. And then, as a head teacher, I would be sitting there on a Saturday thinking, if I just nip into school for a few hours, I could get that report done. And so I became a time thief, and the only people I was stealing time from was myself and my family. I didn't steal time from the school at all. So it was kind of like that thing of, I became more and more Mr. Leech and less David. And so in terms of was there any one thing in particular, I think the ever changing nature of education, that you go through an Ofsted cycle, and the latest buzz things in, and then all of a sudden the government say, oh, actually we need to prevent grooming, so let's bring preventing. Schools can do that. And then the next thing comes in knife crime, schools can deal with that. The next thing comes in drugs, and schools can do that. County lines, schools can do that. And so you're constantly just getting shoveled stuff, that was constant. So and I was very conscious of, I knew how hard my staff work, and I was very, very conscious of trying to take as much or keep as much from their door as possible. So I viewed myself as a senior leader, as a head teacher. I was kind of like an umbrella to protect the staff from as much of the stuff that was unnecessary as possible. Because my core function as a teacher, what I wanted my teachers to do was be brilliant for those children in front of them. We weren't there to be outstanding for Ofsted. We were there to be brilliant for children. And so we didn't talk about Ofsted inspections. We didn't talk about and have rehearsals and things like that, because it was like, no, if you just do what you do on a day-to-day basis, and your brilliant selves, for them, Ofsted will come in, tick a box and go, okay, thanks very much, well done, keep going. And the world keeps going on after that. And so it was very much about trying to be that buffer between the teachers, because they were the important ones, the teachers when I say teachers, I mean any adult that works in a school. I'm not talking about someone as a class teacher. I'm talking about teaching assistants or learning support assistants, because they're at the front line. They're delivering to, and some of our teaching assistants and learning supports, and whatever the role is now called, they were dealing with some of the most challenging pupils with the highest need. And so it was really important to me, actually, you can be at your best for the children. So I think that the biggest cause of my sort of thing was the demise was kind of spinning plates, in terms of trying to, you never got to the point where you felt like you could just consolidate and just be teachers and just really pump into education. But there was always something else that came along, whether it be from the local authority or from the government or from Ofsted or from, in my case, the diocese or something in a faith school. So, I think it's the ever-changing face of education is the biggest challenge that we face in terms of the next agenda. And it changes with governments. Governments want to prove they've made improvements to education, so therefore they change it all the time. So whether it be the multiplications test in year 4, or whether it be the phonics screening, or whether it be this, that, or the other, there's all these new agendas, because every government wants to prove that they've made a difference to education. It's nothing to do with governments and policy. It's about people on the floor. And that's what governments don't ever understand. And they make platitudes because of it. And they talk a really good game, but nothing ever changes. And all they do is add more to the problem. And we were in the biggest crisis of recruitment and retention of staff ever. And not one government minister is saying, perhaps we need to look at actually the workload. Perhaps we need to look at appreciating staff. Perhaps we need to look at this, that education isn't a soapbox that we can stand on and say, look what we've done. The government have done nothing. Successive governments have done nothing to improve education. Teachers have, educators have, and they take whatever it gets thrown at them and they pick it up and they go and do it. And they're incredibly hardworking. So I think, it's that. I'll get off my soapbox now, but I think the important thing is actually recognizing how amazing our education system is and how diligent. And it's the same with all public sector. You look at it in health service, the police, prison service, every organisation whose public sector is on its knees, and that's an international problem, not just a UK problem. But if we fix our house, then we can go talk about other people's houses. So I think it's about important we just put that into perspective and say, teachers, nurses, doctors, ambulance, police, fire, they're not machines; they're humans, and that they're here to do a job. But it's not the most important thing in their life, and it shouldn't be. It got to the point where I felt like it was overtaking the most important things, so family, relationships, then, jobs and things like that. So jobs there for something really important. Yes, it is. We get a lot of good sort of our mental health feelings and our, sort of our feelings of self-worth and all that through our jobs. But it's not the most important thing in my life,
Yeah. I think what is, as you say about, it's very hard to create momentum in the education scene, is because, I think it's treated as a business, but a business makes profits and then they reinvest the profits to get more resources and scale people's time and that. But you can't make money off of, in the education thing. It's just all dependent on what resources the government are giving teachers.
Yeah.
And it is funny because it's just like, all right, okay, we're going to add this thing in. Okay, but where is that time coming from? What are we taking away? Because there is a finite amount of time, and not to that all of these things don't have merit, because it would be great if we have this super detailed gap analysis of all these different things with so granular that makes sense. But if you don't have a data analyst as that's their paid role and they're the separate things, it just falls onto the teacher again, and then there's no time or resources that go with that. So it is incredibly dynamic and demanding profession.
I think you hit the point of the, sorry, Andrew, just to interject there for a second, but I think the successive governments have said, we've never spent more money in education than we do now. And you go, okay, great, but you're not keeping up with inflation. You're not keeping up with real time cuts. when you say, well, we've given teachers a pay rise and blah, blah. Yeah, but how much of that is funded?
Yeah.
And then teachers, then head teachers having to make decisions to say, well, we can't afford to give that pay rise because we're having to fund it from within. And then teachers are going, well, no, that's not fair because I'm going to go somewhere else. So successive governments have said, we'll give them a 5% pay increase, unfunded. And you go, well, hang on a minute, where's the wiggle room in the budget for that? So either take it away from resources or we make redundancies, or it's ridiculous, and so, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's not a finite resource, and more is put on your shoulders. Yeah. So, yeah, I agree.
So, I mean, obviously, as your experience in head teaching, and obviously your ability you were buffering, all of these demands that were coming from the government and all these different things, obviously to your own expense as well. But what sort of systems do you think we should be including into schools to support teachers' mental health, and by virtue of that, children's mental health?
You're absolutely right, because if you protect one, the other one's protected. So when I'm working with schools, I often refer to the school as a dartboard in terms of the shape and the bullseye of a school. Too many schools put the bullseye as the children, and I'm challenging that ideal, because children are the most important thing. No, children are exceptionally important, but the staff are the most important thing, because without good staff, you can't do a good job for the children. So I'm challenging that model to say, well, actually, if you put the staff at the center of what we do, then they in turn will do an amazing job for those children. So, yeah, I think the premise of the bullseye is the staff, and the outer ball are the children. So they're still at the center of what we do, but the staff have to be looked after first. So what I always talk about again is a lot of schools do a lot of good things, and they're trying really hard, and they're really keen to make a difference to well-being and are really well-meaning. But people often look at the wrong things, and so we kind of look at things like, we'll put some toiletries in the toilet that the staff can use. We'll give free tea and coffee at break time. On a Friday, we'll put donuts in the staff room and things like, which are all really well-meaning, but they're not a policy, they're not a strategy.
Yeah.
And so I'm not being flippant about that, because it does create goodwill and things, and it's a lovely thing to do. But if that's all you're doing, then actually it's not addressing the problem. So what I tend to do when I'm working with schools is look at policy, because policy drives strategy. So we look at, yes, there's a wellbeing policy. Okay, great. But wellbeing should feature in all the other policies as well. And it's not a case of you just put you add a paragraph to say, within maths, we consider the workload of blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, what does that mean? Because what we want to do is have the wellbeing going through the DNA of the school. So wherever I look in the school, I see wellbeing in action. So we review policies and we say, well, this is what we do for English, and why do we do it that way? And we're critical about it, and we say, okay, is there anything there? And we ask the staff, within our English policy, I'm reviewing it at the moment, what could we do differently in English? In terms of delivery of that, in terms of the workload, in terms of the marking, in terms of the recording, remembering that English isn't about writing, in terms of the physiological sort of, the physical aspect of writing. Yes, it's important that children can do that, but equally, we don't want to make every lesson a writing lesson. Like, we don't want every history lesson to be writing, because if I'm not very quick at writing, I then hate history, because you're making me write everything down. And so we start to challenge those things of how can we mark and how can we reduce. So we go to the policy, and we involve the staff in it. And I had a conversation with the staff at St Mary's years ago, and said, if you had a magic wand, what could I take away would make your life easier as a teacher? And we were conclusively, I think number one was marking. So we've got to mark and assess. That's part of the key role. Like, we've got to plan, we've got to market, but we can do it differently. And so we went out and looked around, and got into contact with some other schools who had been trialing something called a no marking policy, which we looked into and we adopted. And so we had to change it, and it was really quite funny, because a lot of staff were so almost preconditioned and to thinking, well, if I'm not marking, I'm not doing my job properly. And so it took a bit of weaning off. It was almost like they become institutionalized to spend their Sundays marking books. It was like, But when we brought in the no marking policy, no marking doesn't mean not assessing. And so the children were still being assessed. There were live feedback going on in lessons. It was really powerful. I spoke to the children about the marking, and they talked about purple pen of progress and all that sort of nonsense. I mean, strategy, sorry. And I said, yeah, do you read it? Do you read the marking? And they were sort of, I said, you can be honest, because we're looking to change it. And they said, no. And I think it was something like over 90% of children didn't make it. I said, what about the purple thread of progress when you've got to write down and one of the children hit it on the head and he went, I just write down what I think the teacher wants me to say. And then I write it down and then she says, that's okay. And then we move on and I never think about it again. So the purple thread of progress happened because a school somewhere got an outstanding judgment in an Ofsted inspection. And then all the head teachers in their local authority went, oh, we've all got to do that as well. And that's, yes, I'm being flippant about it. Yes, it has a role. But with that, we've got to think about, is it, and constantly review it. So reviewing a policy, do we still need to be doing that? If we've done it. That's how we always get to that point whereby, it's because we've always done it that way. Well, we don't always have to keep doing it that way. So we can reverse and we can sort of take things away. And when we removed the marking policy, at school, one of my teachers came in to see me on a Monday morning. My door was open and she's poked her head in. She went, David, I just wanted to say thank you. And I sort of looked at him and went, okay, what for? Didn't really understand what she was saying. Thank you. He said, yesterday was the first time since myself and my boyfriend have been in a relationship that we spent all Sunday together and I didn't have to think about marking books. And I went, oh, that's amazing. That's brilliant. And she was an incredibly diligent teacher, incredibly good teacher. She took time out to say thank you and it made a difference to her well-being. So, already that was like a massive thing for me. And it really reiterated the importance of the policies that we do, who often, we've got, say, for example, I've got 70 policies in a school. The only person who really reads them is whoever's reviewing them. And then some of the governing body will look at them to tick them off or not. Not always with all policies, but, and so, we always say policies are on the system, make sure you read them and, blah, blah. Well, how many people actually read them thoroughly? And how many people will then remember what they've read about them and blah, blah. Policies become self-serving when they become bigger than 2 pages. So it's about just making sure that we're just reviewing those. And so I think in terms of workload, comes from strategy, comes from policy. It comes from, what does my policy do? What does it say that my teachers do? And if it's too much and if it hasn't been reviewed and it hasn't been looked at through the eyes of well-being, then it's out of date.
Yeah. And I think it is baffling how, sort of prehistoric some schools are still. I think there is still this hesitation to change and innovate and be creative. And it's a shame because it could like if everyone, it almost needs to be a policy from the DfE. There is, no in-depth marking of these sort of things, or literally limit and put a constraint on, make it so that these schools have that freedom to think, oh, actually, no, like we'd be penalised if we do have that. But I hope there is more of a positive change towards this, because it could literally be such an easy fix.
And I think it has to come from Ofsted as well. Obviously through the DfE and then to Ofsted. But if Ofsted said data, they're not looking at data. Because it's all about coming in and seeing teaching, seeing good teaching, seeing quality first things. But they changed that. And then I was talking to Ofsted inspectors and said, well, your data shows me this. And I go, well, I thought it wasn't about data anymore. And so they're saying one thing, but then the impact is happening, and I'm sure things have changed since I've been out of position. So 5 years, I'm hoping it has moved on. But unless it is a fundamental thing to say, do you know what? The core values, the core functions of a school are to educate. We give you the autonomy to do that, which they do say, but their actions don't always actually follow up on that. I think for a school perspective, they're telling me I've got the autonomy to go and do what I need to do to make the journey great for the children. But if I do it and something isn't right and I step out and I innovate, and then they come in and say that wasn't right, then I get, dragged over the coals, as it were, in an inspection. So I think that's the key, is basically making sure that innovation is encouraged and mistakes are made. And if you make a mistake, that's okay. And because otherwise, if we don't make mistakes, I think education has become a bit risk averse. And we're asking our students to take risks in their learning, but we're not necessarily encouraged to do that by ourselves, by the DfE or by Ofsted.
Absolutely. Yeah. We'll keep our fingers crossed that this does continue, because
Yeah,
there has to be a change. There has to be a change.
yeah,
So, David, I know many, as like, even with you as a head teacher, I think is even more so. You see it in leadership positions, that this idea that, potentially it's more difficult the higher up you go to seek help. There is a sort of stigma around, like, well, if you're a leader, then you're able to sort of deal with that pressure, that you've earned that right, and now you don't need to seek help. You don't need that. So it's almost like, if you're seen as asking for help, it's almost seen as like a weakness. Do you
yeah,
think there's a sort of a stigma around mental health, around, professionals seeking help, and, how do you break that down as a sort of a barrier in your trainings?
yeah. I think you're absolutely right. I think it's sort of people drag themselves into work when they shouldn't be. So presenteeism, it's called. So presenteeism is more costly to the sort of a national economy than absenteeism.
Mm,
I think the last estimates from the health and safety executive was it sort of costs double, at least double, if not treble. The people who are in work, who drag themselves in but shouldn't be there, because obviously your efficiency drops and things like that. And I think the biggest thing is catch people before they fall. So prevention is much better than cure. So how can we
mm,
start to have conversations around this? And so part of our training um, is very much focused on well-being and making sure that self-care is in place and people are given the tools to look after themselves before it becomes acute. Yes, we talk about what to do in the acute stage if someone's in a mental health crisis and things like that. Um, excuse me. Yeah. But I think the fundamental things that we need to consider, yes, is there a stigma? It's less than it has been in the past, but yes, there still is. Um, and people would often sort of, are well-meaning, but would say things, sort of like, it's about separating well-being conversation with a capability conversation. They're two totally different things.
mm,
Um, and if you think about it, when I'm in a mental health crisis, or if I'm suffering with poor mental health, so for example, depression, if I've got a diagnosis of depression, of low mood, um, then parts of my brain are inactive that ordinarily, if I was in a good sort of mental health state, those parts of my brain would be active. So it's not about capability, because yes, my role might be suffering because of my sort of current sort of mental health condition. But if I sort that out, then my capabilities back to normal. So
mm,
well-being and making sure that schools are very aware, and the educators and anyone who works in any role has that ability to say to their line manager or to say to a colleague, "Yeah, actually, do you know what, I'm really struggling." In terms of, I just, and often we don't talk about it until it's too late.
yeah,
So it's about, I'd love to see the performance management cycle that we have, before we review targets and things like that, that we have these well-being conversations that happen away from um, capability, away from performance management. Because if we do have that situation, and in HR, and whether they call them people's champions or they call it human resources and things like that, they're very keen to do these things, and a lot of places are doing these things. But it's about spotting it before it becomes an issue, spotting it before it becomes something that needs intervention. So we're constantly talking about, how we are. And don't forget, talking about mental health doesn't make people mentally unwell. It empowers them to come forward sooner if they're struggling.
mm,
So if we normalize it, and I'm very keen, and that's part of my sort of mission since I sort of stepped away from education, was to sort of smash the stigma around it. So I'll talk about my thing in terms of my journey, my diagnosis, my sort of role with medication, and I was on antidepressants, and I was on anxiety medication, and I was sort of taking therapy, CBT and things like that, and like hypnosis and all. I was trying anything really.
mm,
Yes, I was suicidal at one point, and I'm not ashamed of that, because I definitely wouldn't have been suicidal if I'd been well. and I wouldn't be
Yeah.
thinking about it. So I think it's about being emotionally authentic with the people around you and then discussing when you've struggled. And, and so it doesn't mean because I'm head teacher, I'm immune for mental health. It
Mm.
doesn't mean that if I talk to people as a head teacher about my mental health, then everyone else goes, oh my goodness, well, if a head teacher can't cope, how are we going to cope? That's nonsense. That's old school thinking. We're all
Yeah.
humans. We all have emotions. We all have different needs. We all have different stress buckets. I can take a certain amount before I start to creak. So I
Mm.
think, the stigma does still exist. But it's lessening and lessening. And the more we talk about it, the more, we would not have been having this podcast 10 years ago. So this is a really good thing, so we can talk about this openly. Two men talking on a podcast about their mental health.
Yeah.
Wow. That
Yeah.
just wouldn't have happened 10 years ago. So it's brilliant, and long may it continue.
Yeah. There's hope yet. There's hope yet.
Absolutely.
So you, as your role as a, doing mental health first aid training, what does that look like in a workplace today? And are there any sort of, key skills or strategies that help, break down this stigma that you teach and allow people to apply in their daily lives? Because
Mhm.
I think one of the things, so I do like wellbeing workshops with teachers as well, is that it's how do we make it pragmatic and how do we make it so it's implementable into, their daily lives?
Absolutely. I think the notion of mental health, again, talking about it, that mental health means good and bad,
Mm.
poor and, thriving and surviving kind of thing. It's everything. We all have a mental health. Whether some days it's great and some days it's not, and if I'm having a wobbly day, then I need to make sure I'm taking care of myself, more so than I would be if I'm in a great place, and it's about that self-care aspect of it. So mental health and well-being is not complicated. We associate the complications with complex mental health needs, and we sort of get bogged down in sort of diagnosis and medications and all those sorts of things. Actually, mental health is really quite simple in terms of we all have it. So how is it today? Um, if I'm having a wobbly day, I make sure that I build in capacity to make sure that I am charging my batteries, as it were. Um, I often use the notion of that sort of mobile phone battery of, which of these sort of images would be you, and if your mobile phone had one bar left on it or no bars, you'd probably be feeling quite anxious about getting that plugged in quite quickly.
Yeah.
And yet we allow ourselves to go to one bar or no bars, and we don't think about plugging ourselves in. We just continue to keep plodding and plodding and plodding. So I think the biggest sort of mantra I have with schools is actually, you matter, you as a person, because if your glass is full, you can pour into other people's glasses. And how do I make sure my glass is full? Well, the best way is making sure it's never empty, which sounds quite obvious. But if my glass is almost empty, and then I suddenly go, I've got to fill my glass up, it becomes a harder job,
Mm.
and it takes more time. So if I am constantly topping my glass up, then it never becomes even half full. And so it's great. That's a great line in The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse, which is a book that I regularly flick through. And Charlie Mackesy, who suffered with poor mental health himself, he talks about that. Is your glass half full or half empty? And in one of the conversations, and the boys, asked that question, and I think as the horse says, "I'm just pleased to have a glass."
Mm.
And I think that's
Mhm.
so we get so lost in how am I? But actually, we've got this glass. We've only got one glass. Remember, we only get one shot of this. So what can I do? So the biggest thing I think is about self-care, and it's about regularly taking part in self-care. If as a teacher or an educator or working in business, you're waiting till the holidays to look after yourself, that's not sufficient.
Yeah.
That's when we get to that burnout period. So what I challenge staff to do is put something in their diary every day that's just for them. And it need only be 10 minutes, and if I said to you, when was the last time you did something for yourself? If you're having to think about it, then that's too long ago. So it's about 10 minutes a day. That's the ultimate. If you can't do 10 minutes at first, then just do 10 minutes every other day, or do 10 minutes once a week. It's a start. And it's about, I'm doing something that is just for me, not for my job, not for my children or my family situation or anything like that. It's just for me. Because, when you get on a flight and they talk to you about the emergency exits and all this sort of stuff, and the first thing they tell you is, if the masks drop, put your own one on first before you put anyone else's on. And that's what
Mm.
well-being is. It's a metaphor for well-being. Because if I want to be the best dad I can be, if I want to be the best husband I can be, if I want to be the best in my job I can be, I've got to put my air mask on first to make sure that I can help other people. So having a self-care toolkit is really, really important. And so for me, things like exercise helps, but that's if exercise is my only thing in my self-care toolkit, it's a bit like having a toolkit that's just full of hammers. It's not a very effective toolkit. So I need to make sure I've got hammer, I've got screwdrivers, I've got Allen keys, I've got spanners, I've got all the. So it might be actually, because not all, I can't. Some days I just haven't got the energy or the capacity to go and do a run or something like that, or plod. But I might then actually read a book, or I might go and spend some time with sort of people who are really important to me, or I've got dogs, so spend some time with those. So they all become sort of almost like a tapestry, a patchwork quilt approach to well-being. So that if I don't feel like going and doing some exercise, I can go and do this instead. So it's that idea of just spending 10 minutes a day doing something you love, and something that requires no sort of, it's not a task. So I'm not doing this because I have to know. I'm not reading this book because I need to know about it for a Royal Ofsted inspection. I'm reading this book because of the escapism. And I've got into that. And nowadays I'm reading more than I have in the last 20 years because I've got capacity. Because my mind's not full of a load of stuff, because I keep emptying it out and taking it away and doing those things. So I've rediscovered a love for loads of different things. And then the second part that I always challenge staff to do is, how are you? And it's, I often refer to sort of mood gauging and gratituding and things like that, which can be absolute game changers. But mood gauging is just scoring my mood out of 10 in terms of from 0 to 100, 0 to 10, 0 being horrific and 10 being amazing. How am I right this second? And the key about this is realizing that life isn't about being an 8, 9 or a 10 out of 10. That's occasional stuff. Because we constantly seeking those 8s, 9s and 10s. And we think if we're not an 8, 9 or a 10, we're failing. Well, actually, if I live the rest of my life as a 4, 5 or 6, I've had a really happy life. Because if I can celebrate the ordinary, if I can celebrate, the beauty around me, I'm looking out my window now and there's grey clouds and all that sort of stuff, but actually going walking in that and feeling the raindrops and appreciating that and being present in the moment, that's 4, 5 or 6 means I've had a really happy life. And yes, there's smatterings of 8s, 9s and 10s in there along the way, but that's not normal, because if it was normal, it would become mundane, and then that would become your 8s, 9. And that's where social media comes into well-being. Social media doesn't cause poor mental health, but it doesn't help if you're having a wobble. So if I'm having a wobbly day, I don't go on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or anything, or X or whatever you call it. I don't do those things because social media encourages me to compare myself with other people. And Carol Wivian did some brilliant work in 2009 around the unhelpful thinking habits. And compare and despair is one of the most unhelpful thinking habits we can relate to. And so social media is constantly asking me to compare my existence to yours. And of course, you only post on social media the great stuff that you do. You don't tell me about the fact that you've had sort of diarrhea for 3 days, or you can't find socks, or you don't tell me the normal day-to-day stuff. Although some people do, it's called oversharing. But yeah, and so I'm constantly there going, oh no, but Andrew's gone to the Maldives again. He's gone there for 2 weeks. Oh no, I've not even made it to Southend for the day, and I'm constantly compare and contrast. But actually, if I just enclose myself in my little cocoon when I'm having that little wobble, then I can actually put things into perspective. So mood gauging, 100% is something part of my self-care. Also having that self-care toolkit that's not just full of hammers. It's got the different tools in there, and that takes time to develop. And it's sort of, and it's about a little bit of practice every day helps.
Yeah, no, these are fantastic. It's really insightful ways of doing it. I like the idea that, you do need that sort of a more richer and broader holistic approach with the strategies, because, if exercise is your only outlet, you're not going to, and you're in the middle of the classroom and everything's just sort of falling apart, you're not going to go running down the corridor and doing laps. So
Exactly.
you need to be able to have that sort of real-time tools and just things that just gives you that broad approach to the daily habits and the mindset shifts.
And I think that's really highlighted in the professional sports people when they retire.
Yeah.
And we see a lot of professional sports people suffer with poor mental health when they retire. There's this void, especially if their career's been ended by injury, or not exclusively, but they seek something else in terms of trying to fill the gap. And if they often professional sports people don't have another thing to do other than their sport in terms of fulfilling, getting that same dopamine release, that same endorphin release, that, um, and so we often see, that we have, sort of, real problems with people when they retire. So it's the same. They've got a toolkit full of hammers. And
Yeah.
so it's about how can we find that? And I think that's a real responsibility for the education of young footballers and young athletes and things like that, to make sure they do have self-care as preservation. Because if I get a bad injury, um, if we look at Mikel Antonio's injury, in the car crash he had recently, and horrific, and thank God he was able to sort of come out of it, the other side of it. But that's a really dark place to be in, that recovery period, not just for him, but for any professional athlete in injury, that they can really struggle to, because we can't do what we're normally doing and my body's not working in the same way. So it's about understanding there are other ways that we can have in, other things we can do for our toolkit. So that's what I do with organizations as well, is and individuals are trying to work out what their recharging things are, and build that toolkit around them.
Yeah, that's a lovely way. Yeah, a lovely way of thinking about it. And I think identity. I spoke with a previous guest, Charlie, and he's a strength and conditioning coach, and talks about identity being a really important part of this. But it's almost sometimes that identity can be a detriment, because you can be so tied up into the idea of who you are as something that you're doing. As you say, a professional athlete, that if you don't have anything else then, and you stop that, then it's how do I navigate around that and find approaches to well-being through that. So burnout obviously is, I suppose, is a big, is the bigger issue across all industries, and not even just in teaching.
Yeah.
What are the sort of early warning signs that people should look out for, and how can they address them before they escalate? Because I assume, obviously, you going through your own issues of burnout, you
Yeah.
looking back retrospectively, you can think, oh, actually, I noticed those, and I'm sure even your family might have been able to spot those as well, even before you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing with mental health is, it had its intrinsic relationship with our behavior. And so I work with schools and MATs and Multi Academy Trusts and things, looking at behavior in schools and policies around it. But remembering the behavior is the physical manifestation of my thoughts and my sort of well-being in terms of my own brain. So, for example, if I'm displaying negative behaviors, and I've just been doing some work with the local authority around neurodiversity and mental health, and really interesting to see that obviously with neurodiversity there becomes an increased risk of poor mental health. If I'm living in a society that's been designed by neurotypical people, and I don't quite fit that mold, it's a very difficult place to thrive in. So we've been doing some work around that. But I think one of the interesting things that's come out of it is the challenging our ideals around behavior. So with burnout, how would I notice it? Well, someone's behavior changes. And if we look at the NICE model, NHS talk about the 5 elements to well-being, in terms of our social well-being, our emotional well-being or psychological well-being, our economic well-being, our physical well-being, all those sort of the 5 areas that were. So for me, one of the things, the first thing that goes is social. And so I will make excuses not to go out because I just can't, just haven't got the energy to make small talk or the ideas around that. And I might notice that in a colleague, and sort of how they are. Normally they're quite chatty and bubbly. Sense of humor changes is a big red flag for me. So if someone's normally quite, sort of jovial, and suddenly they're quite retreating into their own space, into their own classroom, not coming into the staff room, not making excuses not to come out socially, or to not engage in certain things. These are all red flags. So behavior is the first one in terms of how can I notice that about the people around me. They're acting differently. I was exhausted, in terms of that. And my wife noticed it. She said, we've had conversations since. She said, I thought you were just exhausted because being a head teacher is a hard job. And it is. But it shouldn't be to the point where, I'm sort of locking myself away at weekends and sleeping and constantly thinking about where's the next nap coming from or something like that. It's, so this is another sign of burnout. Reliance on self-medication as opposed to as a form of self-care. So increasing the uptake of alcohol. I was drinking more than when I was in that sort of mental health crisis in terms of having a glass of wine, fall asleep at night because I wasn't falling asleep because my sleep changed. That's another sign of burnout. So I was relying on having a glass of wine, which then turned into two, which then could turn into a bottle. And then, of course, you wake up during the night feeling worse because you're dehydrated, and the depressive effects of alcohol and so self-medications. So people tend to smoke more, vape more, use other drugs in terms of cannabis and things like that. Sometimes it turns to things like cocaine. And we know that cocaine is one of those things. As soon as I take it, I'm chasing the next hit, and I need to take more to get the next hit to the same level. And so therefore it escalates. And so drug use and self-medication is another thing we might notice. So it might be someone comes in and to work and they might smell of alcohol or something like that, or constantly trying to get situations where, should we go to the pub after work and have that meeting? Should we go to, and they try to create sort of scenarios whereby they can facilitate that. And I think, it's the lack of looking after themselves. So they stop going to the gym. They stop reading as much as they used to. You might notice them in staying later in work because, again, their efficiency's dropped because parts of the brain have switched off. So they're having to stay longer to do the same things as they normally would do in half an hour after school. So things like that, things like, their eating habits change, so they stop eating at lunchtime, or they eat more, they're binging more, or, there's lots of different things, but it all relates down to behavior. So have their behaviors changed? And what's that telling me about that, and you can often tell. So the amount of times people have sort of said to me over the years, I'm a bit worried about such and such. They're not themselves, and I'm not sure what it is. And it's okay. So let's have a conversation about that. And that's what we need to do, is just say to them, I've noticed, Andrew, you're not been coming into the staff room at lunchtime. Is everything okay? You've not been your normal self. Just noticed. And so starting that conversation is really important, and just saying, look, and of course I come to you and say that, and then the first thing you say is, oh, no, I'm fine, I've just been busy, blah, blah, blah. You make excuses. And it's okay. And then I don't shut the conversation down. I just say, look, you know where I am. My door, just knock on the door. Or if it's not open, make a time. And sometimes it might be the third, fourth or fifth time we try, and then suddenly you tell me what's been going on. But if we create a culture whereby that's acceptable, and it's not about capability, it's just actually that I care. That if if you're not yourself, I care because you're human and you matter. And the fact is that you're the center of the bullseye. And if you're not at top whack, then you're not going to be doing your best for the children either. So, it's about that sort of, you care because you matter because you're a person first and foremost. And then sometimes you get people in schools who, come on, we're teachers, we need to get on with it. Well, yeah, okay. Well, the buy-in then becomes, well, if he's not at his best, how can the children be getting the best out of him as well? So that's why it matters from a strategic point of view, from governors and things like that. So I think behavior and its links, you will tell me subliminally through your behavior how you are. And it's about being open to spotting those behavior changes. It's about, we can mask, and we can be very good at masking. And I was very good at masking and pretending to be an 8 out of 10. And I could do that, but there were other things that people would notice. I could pretend during assemblies to be really happy and jovial because the children needed me to be. I could pretend during staff meetings that I was okay and blah, blah, blah. And the interactions in the corridor, I could pretend that I was an 8 out of 10. But I couldn't maintain it all the time. The mask has to come off at certain times. You can't maintain that 8 out of 10 perspective and persona. So it's when people would notice it. And one member of staff came to me. I was sitting in my office one day, the door was open, but the lights were off, and I was just sitting at the computer doing something. And one member of staff came to me and said, David, are you okay? And I was like, so looking around, I went, yeah, really, I wasn't. But I didn't know I wasn't because I was really good at pretending. And I said, yeah, what, why? He said, well, you're sitting in the dark. And I went, oh, I didn't even notice it.
Yeah.
And so she actually noticed that. But actually, this is no reflection on her at all. But actually, if she probably probed a bit more, or came back and said, "No, how are you today?" And just sort of, maybe it might have sparked something in me. I don't know. It's certainly, that's not a criticism of that member of staff at all. She noticed something I didn't, and my wife said to me, "I didn't realise when I got signed off work." She said, "I can't believe I didn't know. I didn't notice. I didn't realise." And I said to her, "Like, how were you supposed to know?" I didn't know. So how could you know? I was really good at pretending that everything was okay. So we all mask. Our children do in school, we do as professionals. And so it's about, you can only mask for a certain amount of time. If I'm your year group partner, Andrew, I will notice certain things have changed and you're not being yourself. And often we go, oh, I must have upset him. And so we internalize it. But often the case is just having that conversation and saying, Andrew, is everything okay? You don't seem to be yourself.
Mm.
And then that can start something. It's just, to reaching out. So yeah, I think behavior is the biggest sign of burnout. And actually acting when we see it.
Yeah, and it's as you say. I mean, it's funny that you said that you were sitting in the dark. It's almost like a metaphor that you was in the dark about your
Yeah.
own,
Yeah.
about what's going on, and yeah, especially the teaching profession. It is like you're an actor. You're an actor.
Mhm.
You have to put on a show for the children, and then boom, back down to reality. And even then, you
Absolutely.
can't even spot those signs. And it's so
Yeah.
important because you know again, I like the fact that you have that idea of putting the teachers at the center of the dartboard, because I think so many schools fail to recognize that you are the funnel through which the children's education comes through. So
Yeah.
and children they're like sponges, and they're very receptive to how you're doing, and like they can sense when you're off. I know I've had days when if I'm not well, or just sort of just hanging on by a thread. Children can sense it, and
Mhm.
if that's a permanent thing that across all the schools are experiencing burnout teachers, then it's really not good, because like literally think about all of those children, the impact, or the lack of impact that those teachers will be able to give,
Yeah.
and the sort of experience of education that because they're teachers, you're a role model for them. And if they're seeing you as someone that's burnt out and just completely, snapping at things and things like that,
Mhm.
that's the education that they're getting. And it's so important and crucial that, through your work as well, that we change that approach to
Yeah.
well-being in the industry. But yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that that's really important in terms of modeling that good behavior or good practice with children as well, in terms of, like I was saying about the mood gauge.
Mm,
And I was working with a couple of schools in Redbridge, London Borough of Redbridge, and we introduced the mood gauge as a thing for the children as well.
mm.
And so this one particular school I'm thinking of, have introduced it as their registration process. So in the
Oh,
morning,
okay.
the teacher will say, good morning, Andrew. And Andrew turns around and says, good morning, 4. And you have, and then Jeff says this, and Jeff, I don't know what school I'm working at, we're called Jeff and Andrew, but Noah, Tom, Olivia, okay. And they'll give a number. And what we do then is anything as a school, we decide that anything below a 3 or a 2, we follow up by break time and say, oh, you said you were a 2.
Mm,
Like, is everything okay? Blah, blah. Anyway, I was introducing this to a class of, I think it was year 4, might have been year 3. I was introducing the concepts, and I'm working with them around doing a mental health workshop for the children. Because it's never too early to talk about self-care with children. Like, it's never too early. So I was working with reception classes and new intake parents, and doing sort of managing transitions, because transitions are a really stressful time for our children. So we're talking to a group of parents who could bring in their children into school in terms of stay and play before they come in September in reception. But this,
mm.
and teaching them how to breathe and stuff like that. So their children, if we get the skills in them early, then they've got a lifetime of self-care and of prevention. But this child, in terms of that, I was writing on so I wrote on the board, top right hand corner of the board, I wrote a 7, and that was I didn't say why it was. I didn't say anything about it at all. Just wrote 7. And we were introducing the concept, and then just before break time, about 5 minutes before break, I went up and changed it, I think, to a 3 or a 4, and just
Mhm.
cropped out the 7 and put a 3 or a 4. And then the children were going out to play, and the 2 little girls stayed behind, and they said to me, one of the girls pointed out, and she said, "Is that your number?" And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "That number on the board, is that your number, like the mood gauge?" And I went, "It is." And she went, "Oh, well, you were a 7, now you're a 4." And I said, "Yeah, yeah." So she said, "Oh." She said, "Would you like, at break time, would you like to come and play with us, and that will help you feel better?" And
Bless.
I went, "Oh, bless you." I was like, "That's so lovely." I said, "But if I need to go to the toilet, and I'll go." And then she said to me, "Well, maybe after you've been to the toilet, maybe if you get yourself a nice drink and maybe go for a walk, that might help you feel blah, blah." And it really just shows you how we can empower children. So straight away,
Mm,
she was coming up with strategies for me, because she knew that playing and having a run around on the playground made her feel better. So then we're starting away straight away. Then she's able to then give me some, and then after break, I came back in, I changed my 3 to a 6. or whatever it was. And both the girls came in, and the first thing they did as they entered the classroom was look at my number. And they looked up and they looked at me and they went like that. And it's about empowering ourselves to take care of it. And they said, what did you do? And I said, well, I took your advice. I went for a walk. Now, I didn't. I went and got a coffee and went to the toilet. And that made me feel bad. But the point of it is, it's just about us demonstrating to the children that the only person who's responsible for my well-being is me.
Yeah.
And if I don't take ownership of it, then why should my employer? And so, yes, our employers can help us, and my school or my organisation can help me, but I'm responsible for it. So unless I take notice, unless I take that little girl's advice and go, look, go for a walk, go over there, then why would it be any different? So I think that's really fundamental, as well as building on what you said about building resilience into the profession. We can build resilience into the future generations just by teaching them how to maintain and protect their well-being.
I love it. And do you know what I really like about this idea is that is because the children are, if you've created a culture and openness for children to be able to share how they're feeling, because obviously if they're saying it as part of their register, that, Tommy is a 1 or a 2. They've shared that with the rest of the class. So that openness does create that culture. It's not just a one-to-one aspect. It is
absolutely,
so it makes everyone else an ambassador to look out for each other. I love it.
And I think that's absolutely the point. And I think it's if I was to say to you, if you weren't feeling great, if you were having a wobbly day, and I say to you, how are you feeling? It's very hard for you to articulate that. But if I simply say to you, what's your number? You can say 2. And I go, okay. Now, a 2 isn't the end of the world. If you say to me you're a 2, I say to you, right, what can we do now that's going to make you a 4? So between now and lunchtime, I want you to become a 4. So you go to your self-care toolkit, and that if you go for a cycle or if you go for a walk, that's a +2 for you. So you can turn a 2 into a 4 proactively just by changing what you're going to do at lunchtime. So rather than driving to Tesco's, you're going to walk to the bakery around the corner. Okay, great. That's what we're going to do. And then actually I'm a 4 now. So, okay, after work, what can I do that's going to turn me from a 4 into a 6? And then I go and I build that resilience in. So it's not being a 2 isn't a problem. It's what you do about it. And that's what mood gauging is. And quite often I'll work with people, and I'll be walking down the corridor and I'll look at them and I'll make eye contact and just look and say, what's your number? And they'll look across the corridor and they'll go like, they go, and that's all I've checked in.
Yeah.
I don't need to have a long conversation about it. If they go to me, okay, I'm a 2, then okay, I'll go, right, I'll see you at lunchtime, and I'll start that conversation. But the point is, it's so easy to find a number. It's so easy to tell me I'm struggling without having to find the words, because when you're in a poor mental health state, to try and delve into that, when you've got racing thoughts, when you've got low self-worth, you've got all this, you haven't got the energy, and why would you bother with me if I can't bother with myself? I can tell you I'm a 2. I can tell you I'm a 1. And so what your 4 would be different to my 4. And so it's all relative. The point is, how can you turn your 4 into a 6?
Yeah.
So, so in answer to that, Andrew, what do you do as part of your self-care? Give me 2 things that are in your self-care toolkit.
I think for me, it's taking a walk. So taking a walk is really, I find it very helpful for sort of creative ideas and things like that. And exercise as well. Yeah. And I think one of the things I have been using as well is just sort of breathing. Really, just as a physiological sigh, as they it's just like the 2 inhales and then a hold and then a sort of an exhale as well. And I think these are these are sort of real-time tools, really useful, because it just gets you back to a state when you're not in that fight or flight, and you can really start to put a bit more effort into, more focus into your prefrontal cortex, instead of acting from the amygdala and the fear zone.
Absolutely. And I think, what you've got also, I know you're a passionate photographer as well. And as a photographer, you have the ability to see the beauty in the ordinary, because if you change the angle of something, if you look at it from a different direction, if you change the lighting, you can see beauty in things. And I think that's a really good sort of metaphor for life, is actually look at things through a lens, a well-being lens, because, I'm looking out now and I can see white clouds, but I can also see really dark clouds over there, and that excites me. I've got that. There's change on the horizon. Is it bad change? No, it's just going to be like heavy rain coming. I love heavy rain because it's that sound. It's that the the smells and the sounds that we associate with heavy rain. I find really relaxing, really rejuvenating. So that looking through it through the lens that you're able to do and create some beautiful images and capture some beautiful images
Mm.
just by changing and manipulating the lens at which we look through and the angles and the things, because every perspective can be changed if we just look carefully enough. And celebrating the ordinary is a gift that you have. And so you've got strategies already in place that you can rely upon. So your self-care toolkit will evolve with you, and so as your well-being journey continues, you'll have more things that work, and you'll take out some old tools that don't work anymore.
Yeah.
I've got a bad knee, I can't go for a run, so therefore I'm going to use something else at the moment. And so we that toolkit evolves with you, and therefore your resilience to burnout evolves as well.
Something you said there reminded me of a quote. It's like from Marcel Proust. He's got some nice ideas, and it's like the journey of self-discovery is not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. So
Yes.
seeing the same things, but with just a different eye, and you can find sort of magic in the mundane is how I like to frame it. And I think
Absolutely.
this perspective is such a big part in this, especially because you don't really need to physically change aspects of your life, which is obviously, is difficult. We can't
Mhm.
then go create all these things. It's very hard. It takes time, but you can
Yeah.
just change the lens. It's very easy to do. Well, not easy to do, but it's possible.
Yes. Absolutely.
So, David, your work around Crusaider. So, Crusaider is the partner in the first aid and mental health company that you do. What is the sort of the impact that you want to have through your work, and like what is the motivation to keep you in this field?
Right. Well, yeah, there's very simple sort of aspects of why we do what we do. So we do physical first aid, and we do the mental health because they're intrinsically linked. So, for example, the somatoform, as we refer to it. So, somatoform being the physical manifestation of what's going on in my head.
Mm.
So, therefore, if I'm experiencing anxiety, there's over 200 physical symptoms I could experience. So, I think it's about bringing the links between that. So, when we're doing first aid training, yes, we do the health and safety approved route into first aid. But we also
Hmm.
talk about mental health in that, with anxiety and panic and things
Yeah.
like those. But also the fact is, when that child comes to you and they've got a tummy ache, they actually have got a tummy ache. It might not be because of a bug. It might be because actually they've got the somatoform, they've got anxiety about something.
Hmm.
So having that link and bringing it to actually hopefully increasing awareness, increasing people's confidence to speak about well-being in terms of and mental health in terms of everyday conversations, and to demystify it. And
Mm.
we tend to get bogged down in long sort of neurological aspects and look for reasons within the neurology of mental health. We don't need to be looking at. There's doctors and psychiatrists and all things that can look at that for us. What we need to look at is the simplicity of it and massively simplify our well-being. That if I'm taking out more than I'm putting in, I will struggle with my well-being.
Yeah.
If I'm not charging and I'm draining, I'm not going to be able to reserve. So I think my sort of passion is about making it as simple as possible to give people real tools, to give organisations real ideas that can meaningfully change people's lives in terms of, like I said, we're only here once. So yes, it's important I do a good job, but I've got to make sure that I'm happy that I can look back on that day, whenever it comes, that it's my last day here, and I can look back and go, yeah, I made the most of that. And
Yeah.
did I learned from it. I learned from my experience. So with Crusaider as a vehicle, we get to go into different organizations. We get to go into hopefully make a real difference to people. That if one thing we're talking about today makes a difference to one person, then that's worth it, isn't it? And it's that,
Yeah.
I used it as a story I often used with children in school about the starfish on the beach, and a person walking along the cliff top and see someone on the beach throwing things into the sea. And as they walk down onto the beach, they realise that thousands of starfish that were washed up ashore on in a storm. And they walked over to this guy and says, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm throwing the starfish back." And he picks up one and he throws it back in. And the guy turns around to him and says, "Well, you can't possibly throw possibly make a difference to all of these starfish. And so he picks one up and throws it. He says, I made a difference to that one.
Yeah.
And that's so important that sometimes we see a problem, we go, it's too big for us to do anything about. And it's really not. If we start with the people closest to us, if we start with our own sphere of influence, then we can make a massive difference. So I'm really lucky now that I have a vehicle through our company that we can now get out and help as many people as possible to hopefully create this positivity around mental health and well-being that we can say, and one of the first things I'll do, it's not about fault. It's about, it's about hope. And it's about learning that if you're in a bad place today, it doesn't mean you're going to be in a bad place tomorrow. And that we can do little things that will incrementally improve the quality of what we do on a day-to-day basis. And I'm very much an optimist around these things. And so saying, well, yes, it's okay to be, and we say it to our children all the time, don't we? You've probably got posters around your school say it's okay not to be okay.
Yeah.
Are we walking that walk? We're talking about it. But are we walking it and saying it's okay? Yes, we all make mistakes. And, and am I sort of some sort of mental health guru or this sort of yogi or anything? No, I'm not. I'm just a normal person who has a bit more information than I did have 5 years ago. And hopefully I can do things to help other people realize that actually your lowest point doesn't define you. It's about that sort of, it's about being honest and open about it and just saying, this hopefully when I pop my clogs, that I've hopefully made a difference to one or two people. And if I have, then that's great, because then hopefully they'll continue to make a difference to one or two people, and then so on. That's how it spreads. So it's not about changing the world. It's about changing the person who I'm working with at that time in terms of helping them. And by doing that, hopefully I can, sort of make a difference. And I sort of set out a stall with hopefully that if I come into contact with someone, they leave my sort of company feeling better than they did when they arrived. And if I can do that, 10% of the time, then no, that's great. If I can do it 20%, that's even better. But do I always do it? Do I always achieve that? No, of course I don't. But do I beat myself up if I don't achieve it? No, of course I don't. But it's just about making those little steps, little positive actions. And hopefully, like as a teacher, you go into teaching to make a difference to children. And now I'm in the opportunity to now hopefully make a difference to more children by keeping their teachers well, and giving them the skills to do that. So it's a really, I feel very blessed to be able to continue my journey in education, just in a different vehicle now.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think you're going through what you went through really does make this a more of a personal mission as well. It's something that you're pursuing through your values and that personal crisis that really sort of drives you to continue this work, because the importance of it more so than if you just did it as a hobby.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I think just as we come towards the end of the podcast, I mean, what is, just for those that do feel that they are stuck and they don't know how to move forward, what do you think is just one thing, like the highest lever, biggest lever that you could pull to really support and those that are struggling with their mental health? What's one thing you would suggest to them?
Yeah, one thing. That's a tough one.
It's hard, yeah.
I think if I was to give advice to someone, my advice would be to ask for help. I think, going back to the boy, the mole, the fox and the horse, and the boy turns around to the horse and says, what's the bravest thing you've ever done? And the horse turns around and says, ask for help. It was the bravest thing I ever did, in terms of not brave as in heroic, but brave as in tackling something I was remarkably uncomfortable about admitting I wasn't coping. And going out and talking and actually going to see my GP, and my GP was brilliantly supportive. It was a real sort of, once I spoke to the GP, then it became easier to speak to the people around me, because the GP was separated and therefore didn't know me from Adam, in terms of, other than would see him when I wasn't well, but had no reason to judge or anything like that. So I think talking to someone independent, just be able to just air all those things that are going on in your head. It's amazingly cathartic. It's the best thing I've ever done. And I continue to do it, just to make sure I unload regularly to various things now. But I do it again, and then once I got confidence talking to my GP, then it was so much easier about confiding in the people I loved and
Yeah.
loved, and sort of, being emotionally authentic with them. So I think, don't ever be fretful about talking about it. Choose the person that you're going to do that with, whether it be some sort of professional, whether it be a helpline. There are brilliant helplines out there now, and I would advocate those 100%. There's lots of different examples we can give, or whether it be the right person. And so in terms of your life or your job, so for example, in school, schools who do this really well are people who don't, say to someone like, who would you like to talk to about it? Just because I'm the head teacher doesn't mean I'm the right person for you to speak to about it. It might be that actually, do you know what? That person in the office is the right person for you to talk to, or that Elsa, who's a TA in year 2, is the right person, because you have that bond. It's not a slight against me. It's just, I'm not the right person for everyone to speak to. I'm like, hopefully I'll be the right person for someone, but no. But the point is about picking the right person. It might be, and I've got clients whose parents perhaps are a little bit old school in their approach to mental health, and it's much more of a come on, just get on with it approach, which isn't helpful if you're struggling. So that isn't the right person for them to talk to at that time. But it might be that actually, you know what, their little sister is much more au fait with it, and actually that's the right person to speak to. So yeah, I think choose, speak, be honest. Be honest with yourself about how when you do speak, be honest. And when someone says to you, how are you? The classic British thing is, I'm fine. Yeah, thank you. How are you?
Yeah.
Whereas I might be struggling to get out of bed in the morning because I just can't face it. So talking is definitely the first step. And then after that, everything else sort of comes around, but certainly the sort of Minesweeper moment. If you remember the old computer game Minesweeper, when you click on a square and it opens up, that kind of having that first conversation with my GP, which was inspired by my wife too, I have to say. I came home, and I got signed up. Well, I didn't go to work. I was ill because I've just physically had the burnout, physical manifestations. But, and after I think 3 days, she said to me, look, we need to go to the doctors. And she took me, and I'm forever grateful for my wife in terms of the support she's given me over, since we've been together nearly 20 years. And so, and the lack of judgment about it, it was so authentic. I want you to be okay. And that genuine love through her actions was such a game changer as well. And we went to the GP, and that was the game. That was the change. And a lot of people said to me, in terms of my own story, my own recovery, what was the thing that made the difference? And, and it was a triumvirate of, it was talking, it was medication, and it was self-care. But the thing that was present in those 3 areas was kindness and love, because my GP didn't judge me. He was kind, and I view kindness as a form of love, not in a Valentine's Day kissy sort of way, and just in that how we interact with each other, and we can show love to other human beings in our actions. And the medication that he prescribed me helped. Just I don't know how much it helped, but I took it. If he said to me, take one of these for the rest of your life every day, I'd say, okay, that's fine. And I'm not on the same medication anymore. I'm not on medication at all anymore because I don't need it. But if someone, if I needed it again, I would 100% go back onto it. If someone tells me that's what I need. And then lastly, that sort of self-care of knowing, okay, yes, I need to do this, and I need to go and be proactive, and go and recharge my batteries. But the biggest thing throughout all of those, as I said, was kindness. People, strangers. When I left the school, the outpouring of love that I received from parents and children and staff was overwhelming, and it was a lovely thing to receive. And I still bump into people now who I worked with in schools as a leader, and we have great relationships still now, and it's lovely to be able to maintain those things. So I think your journey is never predetermined. I think we've got to remember that. One door closes, another one opens, and I thought leaving education was never going to happen. But it did. And I'm really happy in what I'm doing now. And I'm not having to master the fact that I'm happy. I'm just happy. And I'm a 4, 5 or a 6 every day. And, some days it changes, and some days I am wobbly and I'll have a 2 out of 10 or a 1 out of 10, but it's not the end of the world. Whereas before it would have been the end of the world, and it would have been something I really focused on and honed in on. Now I go, okay, I'm a 1. Because I check in with myself twice a day now. When I'm having a wobbly day, I check in 3 times. So I do my mood gauge 3 times a day when I'm wobbly. if I'm not in a good place, I check it twice a day, in the morning and in the evening. And I check in and say, how am I authentically? Okay, yeah, I'm a 1. Well, let's go and do it. Let's go and get on the bike. That'll mean I'm a 4 by the time I finish that bike ride.
Yeah.
And so it's empowering ourselves. So very long answer to a very short question, but basically
No,
speak,
yes.
talk, reach out.
Yeah. No, that's they're really, yeah, it's very useful and practical advice, and I think it does need to be heard. And I feel like acceptance is the cornerstone of this, because it's kind of like going back to that metaphor of you being in the dark. Then, like, you know, in the office, it's just shining a light in a
Mm,
dark space, and it comes with,
mm,
yeah, being radically accepting of where you are, and just acknowledging that. And from there, then you can approach these conversations with professionals. You can go and find those resources because you know where your starting point is, instead of just sort of sweeping it under the rug.
absolutely.
So, David, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really insightful, and it's been, yeah, just it's so refreshing to hear just your personal story and just the possibilities that are open to others. You know, you've gone through what you'd say, like, you know, a crisis point and a low point, but you've found a path through. And it's, I think, the more we share these stories and the more we have these conversations, we can illuminate the path for others to show that it is
Mm,
possible. Um, and we like to sort of end the podcast in a question, and the approach that we have at Clearly Wellbeing is, like, you know, an approach to fulfillment is, instead of pursuing fulfillment, we instead of pursuing happiness, rather, we pursue fulfillment. And the idea around that is because fulfillment encompasses pain and difficult things, and you know, the ones and the twos and those difficult parts of life, as opposed to, if you just focus on happiness, well, you're going to be really tripping yourselves up, because there's definitely going to be a lot of days that you're not happy. So I think a long-winded question here is, well, what does fulfillment mean to you? Like, how do you, because I feel like that's a really important way of defining your approach to life.
yeah. Yeah.
It's a deep question, I
I
know.
could,
I
I
always
could,
end
I
in
could
it.
write a book about this.
Yeah, yeah. Start another
No, do you know what?
podcast.
Fulfillment to me means seeing it and getting joy from mundane, from ordinary,
Mm,
from appreciating that, you know what, I woke up this morning and there were people who didn't. Um, you know, I'm able to sit here in a house that's warm, and, you know, and talk to you online because I've got internet that I
yeah.
can afford to buy. And that makes me different to other people in the world. You know, we can converse freely and talk about challenging things without fear of of any sort of reprisal, which makes us different to a lot of people in the world. Um, and I think that sometimes it's spotting the joy in the most mundane that is happiness for me. And actually, you know, you walk outside and you experience the day, because today is different to every other day that I'm ever going to have. And, you know, and I'm on a, I don't know if you've seen it. There's a beautiful image of a grandfather walking hand in hand with his grandson, and in their core, instead of seeing their organs, they've got an egg timer. And you can see
Mm,
that the grandfather's egg timer is very much, the bottom of the egg timer's full, and the top of it's not very much sand left to come through. And the
yeah.
child who's holding the hand has got the top part of the egg timer is very full, and the bottom's is quite empty because of where they are in their life. And I think that's a beautiful image just
Mm,
to bring home. It's not a morbid image at all. It's a beautiful image of saying, actually, do you know what, our time is ticking, and we don't know when that last grain of sand is going to drop through. But the point is, it's about making sure that we don't spend each day worried about that. We spend each day treating it like this is my last chance to make a difference. And so, yes, if I go out today and, you know, the sun's out now, but the dark clouds are still on the horizon. So I'll be heading over to go and work with someone this afternoon about their well-being, and actually taking it in. So I think what does it mean to me? It means the ordinary is wonderful, and stop chasing the Instagram moment and start living in the present. Because if I live now, I know there's no danger around me. I'm safe. I'm happy. I've got loads of things to be thankful for. And actually, I don't have to worry about tomorrow, because if I take care of today, tomorrow will take care of itself.
mm,
And hopefully I'm here to see tomorrow, and hopefully I'll be here to see next week, next month, next year. But the point of it is, if I'm not, then I've made the most of the time of the time that's been allowed to me. And I've seen the beauty of some amazing things. And I'll go to South Weald and walk the dogs and just take notice of the dappled light coming through the canopy. And the smells around it, the petrichor from that rainfall. So yeah, just live in the moment, appreciate it, and remember that the ordinary is brilliant.
Love it. I mean, yeah, that was a really well put answer to a very difficult and deep question. But yeah, what a beautiful way to end the podcast. So, David, thank you so much for your time today.
It's my
And
pleasure. Thank you for
yeah,
inviting me along.
my pleasure, mate. Right, we'll hopefully catch up soon.
Absolutely. Good luck with the project. It's amazing stuff you're doing. So wish you all the best.
Appreciate it, David. Sweet
All
soon.
right. Take care. Bye bye.